that we went to Mu'tah. Just pretend that for a second. What would you see over time? What would be the biggest difference you'd see from one of those milestones to the other that would be very impressive? What would be the biggest thing? The number of people. The number of people. The number of people is not just growing, it's compounding. In Badr there was 600 of us. In Mu'tah now there's an army of 3,000. I mean, you just need to understand that an army of 3,000, by certainly even in today's terms, is a pretty big army. That's a big army. When they went to Fath Makkah, how many did they have? How many did the Muslims have? 10,000, 10,000, 10,000 is massive. 10,000 was the size of the army that went and attacked Medina during Khandaq, right? And so this is a massive army. So what you're seeing around you, subhanAllah, is the massive number of Muslims coming into Islam, the massive number of Muslims participating in this thing. And it's called by multiple things. So the other reason, by the way, the books of Sirah mention it, is it's the first battle in which the Muslims face off against what kind of power? A superpower of the time. The Roman Empire, which is the superpower of the time, right? And we'll understand how this unfolds. So this is now like you're going against the biggest bully of the bullies of the time, right? So it's a major deal, which is another reason why they called it a ghazwa. And by the way, the superpower is non-Arab. You'll see that most of the fighters on the other side actually were of Arab Christian origin. However, the backers of them were the non-Arab Romans, right? Who would give them weapons, who would supply them with men, who would back them up, as we'll see in a minute. The other name that the books of Sirah have given it is they called it Jaysh al-Umara. And the Sahaba actually gave it that name. The Sahaba called it, this army is the army of the leaders. Jaysh al-Umara is like the army of the leaders, or the army of the, an Amir, right? Umara is the plural of an Amir, right? A leader, right? So the Sahaba all calls it Jaysh al-Umara. Why do you think they called it the army of the leaders? Why would the Sahaba call it that? Yes, there were three very prominent leaders who the Prophet ﷺ appointed by name himself. And it's the first time that he said, this is number one, this is number two, this is number three. The Prophet ﷺ had never really done that before, right? Okay. So they also call it Jaysh al-Umara, which means the army of leaders. Mu'tah itself is a very small village in a plain in what is today modern day Jordan. It is what we will call Bilad al-Sham. So Syria is Sham, right? Sham is 4 countries, right? In modern map terms, when you say Sham, also in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, Syria, which is the biggest, land-wise, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine, right? This is all Bilad al-Sham. So in all the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, when he says, Allahumma barik lana fi Sham, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us barakah in our Sham, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us barakah in our Yemen. These are hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Prophet ﷺ has a hadith where he says, when the ummah is weak in iman, and it's the time of corruption and fitan, look for iman in Asham. There's another hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He talks, the Prophet ﷺ, as we know and we discussed before, the second coming of Isa alayhi salam, of Jesus, peace be upon him, where does that happen? In Asham, right? He specifically says, actually in Damascus, right? He comes to the masjid of the two white minarat in Damascus. This is where Isa alayhi salam descends. So this is a holy land from the start of time. This whole land, for us as Muslims, this is a blessed, sacred land where many of the messengers and the prophets have been. Many of them were born. Many of them finished their missions over there. And you can, as we know our seerah, we know our Quran, we know, for example, Ibrahim alayhi salam was there, Yusuf alayhi salam was there, Yaqub alayhi salam was there. You could go down the list, all the messengers of Bani Israel up until Isa alayhi salam were in that part of the land and the world. So this is a very blessed land. In fact, the other hadith that I was just reading the other day is the Prophet ﷺ mentions in one of the hadith Damascus by name. Dimashq that was just liberated, he mentions it by name. And the Prophet ﷺ says, there will come a time when you will liberate the city of Damascus. He said, Baladun yuqalu laha Dimashq, a city called by Damascus. Why would the Prophet ﷺ not just say Damascus? Because it wasn't known. It wasn't known to the Arabs. Remember, the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba are in today the Arabian Peninsula, right? They're Mecca and they're Medina. They haven't been that far north. The further northern post that they've gotten to is called Busra. Busra is south of Damascus. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لِإِلَافِ قُرَيْشِ إِلَافِهِمْ رِحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ, the cities where the Arabs traveled to trade, the upper northern limit was called Busra, which is not quite Damascus. You're not in Damascus yet. So the Prophet ﷺ gives a prediction that you will liberate a city called Damascus, and you must care for it, and this will become essentially the base of movement of the people of Iman at the time, right? So, so this is another thing that Mu'ta is actually today in Jordan, and it's a very small. In those days, what would have been called a small provincial town. So, like if you're traveling to Vancouver, BC, what's a small provincial town on the way? What is it? Blaine. Okay, great example. Blaine. So, like Blaine, but it's called Mu'ta, and it's in Jordan, right? And this is now where the army is marching. It's between. Anyone here from Jordan? You're from Jordan? So you know Amman and Karak. You should be doing. So it's like right. You're from Jordan? Yeah. Amman and Karak, right? Amman is the capital of Jordan. Karak is north, right? And so, Karak is in the south. Okay. Okay. That's why we need maps and things. So yeah, Jazakumullah khair. So Mu'ta, by the way, but you can imagine if you're in Medina, Mu'ta is a long hike. Like Mu'ta is like you're going by camel or by horse. It's a long hike, right? So Mu'ta is a long way away. There's many reasons, actually 3 reasons specifically why the authors of the Siyar of the Prophet ﷺ have given for this particular ghazwa. The most preeminent of which is that the Prophet ﷺ wanted to avenge the killing of Al-Harith ibn Umayr al-Asadi. So the Prophet ﷺ had sent a companion in the form of an ambassador, in the capacity of an ambassador, and he was killed by the Ghasasina. So like every superpower today, this is, subhanAllah, when you look at the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, you look at history truly is the exact same, right? You know how like certain superpowers have what we would call agent states or proxies that operate on their own. They're not quite there. We didn't do that. They did that. We didn't bomb Gaza. The Israelis did bomb. But we supplied them the weapons and we gave them the food and we had the satellite reconnaissance and we made all that available. But we didn't do it. So this is how they operated back then. So the Romans, the limits of the Roman Empire, so the borders, so to speak, were what we would call today Palestine or the Jordan River, but the areas around it were under the influence of the Romans, and they did what the Romans did. They did what the Romans asked. Plus, they were all Christians, right? So this was a set of Arab tribes that were Christian. Incidentally, that was also true in the rest of Bilad al-Sham, up to and including Syria. Right? Even in the Battle of Yarmouk, for example, way later on with Sayyidina Khalid ibn al-Walid at the time of the Khilafah of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, the people that fought in Yarmouk preeminently were the Arab Christians, supplemented by the Roman Empire by an army that came from where? Does anyone know? Where was the leader from? Armenia. He was an Armenian general. He was a very famous, he was like a legend for Heraclius. He brought him from Armenia with all his special forces to fight the Muslims. Like they were the ones that were going to do the real work. The Arabs were just there as like, the ones you put on the front line, like you want to get rid of them, right? But the people doing the work were actually the Romans. So this was a similar situation where the Prophet ﷺ sent this companion, and he was killed and tortured. He was actually captured, tortured, and then killed by the Ghasasina, and he was killed specifically through their king. Their king is the one that killed him. So ambassadors are not killed. All throughout human history, messengers are not killed. Messengers are safe, right? Even if they're the messenger of your enemy, you don't kill the messenger. So they captured the Sahabi and they killed him. And the leader of the Ghasasina was called Shurahbil ibn Amr, and he tortured him and he killed him with his own hands. And they had this after they killed him. Part of their attitude was like, "What are you going to do about it? Like what are you going to do?" Yeah, a little bit like kind of Israel did today, or over the last couple of days. Is anyone following the news? Does anyone know what Israel did recently with Syria? Like they did a whole bunch of things, but like they bombed the Air Force Base, they bombed the Navy, and they invaded the ceasefire lines of 1974. It's an opportunity. Why not? It's an opportunistic thing, and the attitude is, "What are you going to do? Show me what you're going to do." Right? And inshallah, they'll see, but not now. Maybe not now, right? So this is the same attitude that they have. Like, what are you going to do to me? Okay? So this was Shurahbil ibn Amr. The other saying in the books of Sirah is that the governor of Busra had threatened to attack the Muslims, right? And the bazaar, the users in the bazaar, they threatened. That's a weaker opinion. Ibn Kathir, he has a really good point of view. He says that one of the wisdoms of the Battle of Mu'tah is the preparation for Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid himself to face off against the Romans in the future. So it's like this is his training camp, you know, if you like, for things that he will do in the future. By the way, when is the next fight against the Romans? So Mu'tah is now. When is the next one? What's the next one called? No, Tabuk. Tabuk happens at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So Mu'tah is one, Tabuk is the next one, and the one after that becomes Yarmouk. The really major one after that becomes Yarmouk. Lots of things happen in between. Yarmouk happens after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, right? But the major events are Mu'tah, and then Tabuk, and then fast forward, you get into Yarmouk, right? In between, Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid had many, many events, right? So many things that we won't talk about, but let's just focus on Mu'tah for tonight. So, in Jumayd al-Awwal of the 8th year of Hijrah, the Prophet ﷺ looked for volunteers for the army, and 3,000 of the companions signed up. It takes roughly a month and a half to get there and back, right? So it's a long ride. You're riding for a very long time before you face off against the enemy. And Medina had gotten much larger than obviously the time of the Hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ, naturally, because the Muslims are increasing, and so the city is growing. And there's a hadith by Ibn Abbas, radiallahu anhu. Who's Ibn Abbas? The cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, right? One of the most knowledgeable companions. And he says that the army left on a Friday, and they left early in the morning. And I signed up to join the army. And after he signed up to join the army, he's like, do I leave with them now? Or do I go and pray Jummah and get the reward of praying after the Prophet ﷺ? Like, we would think that way, right? We'd be like, I wonder if I should just wait and listen to the khutbah first. Should I listen to the khutbah and pray, or should I join the army now? So he said, hey, I can do both. This is Ibn Abbas saying to himself, I can do both. I'm going to listen to the khutbah of the Prophet ﷺ, pray behind him in the masjid, and then I'm going to drive really fast and break all the speed limits and catch up with the army. That's what he said. So he prays after the Prophet ﷺ, and after the prayer, the Prophet ﷺ saw him. And he said, I thought you volunteered to join the army. He said, yes, Ya Rasulullah, but I wanted to pray behind you to get the reward. He said, if you spent everything in the world worth of sadaqah, you would not get their reward because they left early. Right? Meaning, if you committed, getting a greater reward would have been to join the army and not to pray, even, Jum'ah with the Prophet ﷺ in Medina. So this is a famous hadith that occurs. There's lots of hadith, by the way. We're just going to cover some of the key ones. You won't be able to get the reward of the army leaving early. Okay. So then the Prophet ﷺ tells them the following. He says, your number one pick for leader, first leader is going to be Zayd ibn Haritha radiallahu anhu. What was his previous name? Zayd ibn Muhammad. Remember, he grew up in the house of the Prophet ﷺ, right? He was gifted to the Prophet ﷺ after the marriage to Khadija radiallahu anha. And he was returned almost to his father as an uncle. They came to him when he was a little bit older, and they said, you could go back. You can come back. And the Prophet ﷺ said, it's up to you. I'm not forcing you to stay. If you want to go back with them, you're welcome to go back with them. And he says, no, I want to stay with you. So his father goes and speaks with him. He's like, you prefer to stay with this man as a slave than to come back with us? Like, you're going to be a slave. Like, you have no future here. And he says, Wallahi, I've never seen the love that, and he says, Muhammad, he doesn't say sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the time, has shown me than any other man. And it's at that event, this is in early Mecca, before the Prophet ﷺ got Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, that he takes him to the Kaaba, and the Prophet ﷺ announces to the Mecca that this man is now going to be called Zayd ibn Muhammad. And then when does that change? MashaAllah alayk, MashaAllah. Surah Al-Ahzab, which is revealed way later in Medina, right? Call them by their father's names. So now he gets back his father's name, which is Zayd ibn Haritha. Right, so his real name is Zayd ibn Haritha, right? So Zayd ibn Haritha will be leader number one. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib will be leader number two. And Ja'far ibn Abi Talib is the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, the brother of Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, the elder brother of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. And then he said number three is Abdullah ibn Rawaha. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, if you remember, is the one that came back from Abyssinia, and the Prophet ﷺ, when he saw him, he got up and he kissed him, and he said, I don't know what makes me happier today, the liberation of Khaybar or the return of Ja'far, right? He was so happy to see Ja'far again. And Abdullah ibn Rawaha was one of the poets of the Prophet ﷺ. There was two very famous poets. One is Abdullah ibn Rawaha, and the second is Hassan ibn Thabit, radiallahu. And they had very different characteristics. Like one was a fighter, one was an artist, right? You could just say, right? So this was the fighter amongst the poets of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is Abdullah ibn Rawaha, radiallahu anhu. What are one of the other benefits that you can think of Zayd ibn Thabit? He is? Of Zayd ibn Thabit. What is it? Zayd ibn Haritha. Sorry, Zayd ibn Haritha. Yeah. What are one of the other blessings of Zayd ibn Haritha? He's mentioned in the Quran by name. By name. فَلَمَّا قَضَى. So Zayd radiallahu anhu is mentioned by name. Second, number two would be who you think? Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. But what does the ayah say? إِذْ يَقُولُ لِصَاحِبِهِ لَا تَحْزَنْ. Now, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is referred to as a pronoun, not by name. Right? Not by name. So Zayd radiallahu anhu is referred to by name in the Quran. Abu Bakr is referred to in a pronoun. As he told his friends, or as he told his companions, don't worry, Allah is with us. Right? This is Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, right? So Zayd ibn Haritha has a very, very, very high status in Islam. And Aisha radiallahu anha has an amazing hadith about Sayyidina Zayd ibn Haritha, where she says, in general, the Prophet ﷺ, if Zayd was going, he would pick him to be the army leader. And if he was still alive at the time of death of the Prophet ﷺ, there would be no question that he would be the next in line to take the Khilafah after the Prophet ﷺ. And she says this even though who is the Khalifa? Her father and her father, Abu Bakr. Right? So she says this in the sense of the love and the respect and the capabilities, obviously, of Sayyidina Zayd from the Prophet ﷺ, right? So the people of Medina escorted the army out to a specific spot on the borders of the city, right? And it's called the Hill of Farewell. Right? When we talked about this before, Hill of Farewell, Medina, yeah. What is it? What is it in Arabic? You know how we, like when someone's flying, we take them to the airport, we shake their hands. Like a long time ago in the US, when I came here, like in the 90s, you used to actually be able to take people all the way to the gate. I don't know if anyone here has been here this long. Like you used to take them all the way to the gate. Like go through security. I lived in Atlanta at the time. Like you took them and you watched them get on the airplane, right? Of course, that stopped, right? But like you take them to the airport, you give them a hug, you shake their hands, you make dua for me, this and this and that. This was their version of that. The Ayatul Wada was for the people of Medina. This was it. This was their airport for people departing Medina. Obviously, they're not flying, but you understand what I'm saying. And this is also in what? What's the sha'ar? طلع البدر علينا من ثنيات الوداع, right? So as the Prophet ﷺ was coming, and also it is said that this was also, they also saying this when the Prophet ﷺ came back from Tabuk. When he came, what? Yeah, but there's two opinions. Like one opinion is when he made the hijrah, the second is also when they came back from Tabuk, right? طلع البدر علينا من ثنيات الوداع. Okay. On the way out, but the Prophet ﷺ gave them a white flag. So we should understand that as Muslims, white flag for us doesn't mean surrender. Okay? So this is a Western concept, but the Prophet ﷺ gave them a white flag to denote the army. It doesn't mean go and surrender. So we don't have the concept of like waving the white flag means we're surrendering, right? So they had a white flag. Just thought I'd mention that as something that you should know. As they're leaving now Medina, Abdullah ibn Rawaha, who's the poet, so leader number 3 and the poet, he starts to cry. And people ask him like, why are you crying? And he says because he remembered the ayah, the end of the Quran, وَإِن مِّنكُمْ إِلَّا وَارِدُهَا كَانَ عَلَى رَبِّكَ حَتْمًا مَقْضِيًّا. Anyone know this ayah? Which surah is it in? Surah, very early Revelation, very early Mecca, speaks about a major messenger of Allah, called after his mother, second to last page, Surah Maryam, right? Surah Maryam, right? So Surah Maryam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has this ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِن مِّنكُمْ إِلَّا وَارِدُهَا. Every single one of you will cross over, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. hellfire on the day of judgment. And so Allah remembers that. And he says, how am I able to cross that on the day of judgment in the same way that I was crossed this hill on the way outside of Medina, right? So this is one of the hadith also mentioned on the departure of the army. And the Sahaba then, you can imagine if they're wishing an army farewell, what's the number one thing that they're saying to them? What do you say when someone goes away on a trip? Come back safely, right? Each other safely, inshallah. So they're all saying, may you return safely, may you return safely. And wallah, I wanted to get you the Arabic, but I didn't, just in the interest of time. Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he's a poet. Right? You just need to understand the power of these poets and Arabic poetry and their eloquence. Is like they didn't memorize things and write down notes like we do and start to, this was, in the US when they call an improv, when they say it's an improv? Yeah, it just happens. Like he just makes it up as he's going along. Right? He doesn't sit there and prepare. What am I going to say on the way outside of Medina? Like he doesn't do that, right? Incidentally, that's how they were. Not just this is an example of it, but even in terms of battle, when they used to face off each other, the first people that we used to get up and start to yell poetry were the poets and the armies. Even in the time of Jahiliyyah, the poets would come out first, and then the champions would come out second. By the way, the poetry thing was only an Arab thing. The poetry thing was it wasn't like a Persian thing or a Roman thing. It's only an Arab thing. And the better poet, people would say, oh, he was a really good poet. I bet that's how it's going to win. You know what I mean? So, by the way, just as a funny side distraction, this continued to happen with the armies of the Muslims, right? With the poets who would come out first, up to and including when they faced the Persians for the very first time, right? When they faced the Persians for who was the army leader at the time, by the way? The very first time. The very first battle against the Romans. Sorry, no, the Romans, the Persians. Khalid ibn Walid. And it was called the Ghazwat Dhat al-Salafah, mashallah. It was called the battle of the tying of the chains, or the chains, right? And this happened in modern day Kuwait. Like if you look at, again, the CV of Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid, at the time of the Khilafah of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, he basically sent out two armies. One army was led by Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid, and it went east, and the other army went south, right? South to Yemen, east. The one that went east, number one, this was led by Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid. What did he do first? He cleaned up all the liars, the Musaylim al-Kadhab, and he got rid of those guys, and he continued to head east until he got to Kuwait. And in Kuwait, what do we have? Slightly northeast, the Persians. He's now in Persian territory. Persians like you've got to be kidding me. You guys are coming to fight us? Like, are you out of your mind? So they show up, but the general of the Persians, he does research on Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid. He's like, hey, this guy's like a famous fighter. I better get ready for him. And he's very well known. What was his specialty? So he was a military strategist across everything. What was his specialization specifically? Cavalry. Remember, in Uhud, he was the leader of the cavalry of the Quraysh. He had one side, and who had the other side? That's why they were best friends. Like left-hand side, right-hand side. But both of them were cavalry. She's like, this guy's a cavalryman, and I know his techniques. Like he attacks and he retreats and he attacks and this and that. I'm going to get my army ready in a way. And the Persians were known. By the way, they had far superior weaponry. So number one, they have better weapons, better technology, more men, more money, right, than these Arabs do. But in addition to that, he said to defuse the cavalry of the Arabs, I'm going to tie chains between the men, so it renders the attack of the horses ineffective, number one. Number two, it tells those Arabs that we're not escaping. We're never running away. These soldiers that are very tough, that are decked out in armor, are never going to leave. And so that's how he faces off against Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid, right? And when he sees him, you know the very famous story, like he sees him, and this happened, by the way, multiple times, Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid, what I'm about to say. That happened in Yarmouk, but it happened here as well. He says, listen, man, you guys are just a bunch of poor shepherds. You should just like go back to the desert where you came from. Like, don't bother us. You got to be joking that you're coming to fight. And then anyway, and then they face off. Long story, but they face off, and then the Arabs bring out the poet. And the poet starts to yell Arabic poetry at the Persians. The Persians are looking at each other, and by the way, they have this like in the Persians are like, what's this guy even saying? Like, we don't even know what he's saying, and we don't care. And it's not from their tradition, right? So they're like, no, like we want the champions to come out and to fight each other. Like we start this war like real men, like we're the champions, right? And so Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid said, okay. So he goes out. So he's like, I'm the champion. Now they know who he is. They're like, wait, you're the general. The champions are not the generals of the army. The champions are just like the next level black belts. You understand? They're not the instructors of the school. Right? So he comes off, and now the other leader's got to come out himself. Like otherwise he's going to be a coward. You understand what he just did? And he kills them in about a minute. Like he takes no time. He kills the leaders of the Persians in front of him. So now the army is going to battle without a leader. This is Ghazwa Dhat al-Salasil. And the Muslims start to charge with the cavalry against them. And he does a technique where he doesn't keep pushing. He attacks and he comes back, and then he attacks from a different direction. He comes back, and he attacks from the back, and he comes back until he destroyed them completely. By the way, the techniques that the Persians used, the Romans couldn't defeat. Like the Romans went into this battle with complete confidence that they fought, the Persians went in with complete confidence that they fought another superpower and defeated them. These techniques are like what we would call tried and true. So don't tell me that a bunch of people from the desert are going to come and teach us warfare. He completed his army of 20,000, by the way, right? Army of 20,000 Romans, like a very powerful division. This was just scene one of the battle against the Persians with Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu. Okay, so Abdullah ibn Rawaha now, as they're saying, may you come back safely. He says for them, I'm translating the poetry very loosely. He says, as for me, I ask for Allah's maghfirah, and a blow, meaning to get hit in battle, that is very strong, that when people pass by my grave, in other words, he wants to become a shaheed, they will say, Allah guided him to be a warrior, and how rightly guided he was. So he recites this poetry on his way out. Zayd ibn Arqam, who is the cousin he's a distant cousin of Abdullah ibn Rawaha. He's riding behind him on the camel as they're going to Mu'tah. So he hears the poetry. He's younger. He's much younger than him. And he hears it and he starts to cry. You know, he hears his older cousin say, he starts to cry. And Abdullah ibn Rawaha looks at him and is like, why are you crying? He says, Ya luqa. What is a luqa in Arabic? Like, you fool, like you idiot. You know? So he's riding the camel and he hears it and he's like, you idiot, like why are you crying? He said, what does it matter if I die in the battle? If I die in the battle, I die as a shaheed, and you get to go back on the camel on your own. You get to take the camel and ride it back. I'm not going to ride the camel with you. So this is one of the things that happened with him on the way up. Yes, subhanAllah. And he, just talking about him some more, Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he was obviously an Ansari. He was chosen by the Prophet ﷺ at Uqba. He was the one, if you remember when we covered Badr, what mission did he have in Badr after the battle? Does anyone remember? What mission did he have in Badr after the battle of Badr? Yeah, what mission did he have? The Prophet ﷺ sent him as the messenger to Medina after the Muslims had defeated Quraysh. He's the one that went back with the good news to Medina. He sent Abdullah ibn Rawaha back to Medina, and he gave him his own camel. He gave him his own camel. So Abdullah ibn Rawaha rides the camel of the Prophet ﷺ back to Medina to give them the good news of the defeat of the Quraysh. The Prophet ﷺ specifically picked him for that. And if you remember what we said at the time, the munafiqeen of Medina said, he's gone crazy. The Muslims have been completely wiped out and killed, including the Prophet ﷺ, and that's why he's riding his camel. Right? This was what the munafiqeen said to Abdullah ibn Rawaha when he came back. Okay. So another hadith mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ, Ni'am al-Rajul ibn Rawaha. He says, like, what a great man, you know, Ibn Rawaha is, radiallahu anhu. And there's a very famous hadith. Sorry, I couldn't read my own handwriting. Very, very famous hadith. I love this hadith. So this is another one of the characteristics of Abdullah ibn Rawaha radiallahu anhu. The Prophet ﷺ was once in the masjid, and a delegation comes in. Delegation comes in, and the Prophet ﷺ was either giving a khutbah, giving a talk, and he asked them to sit down. So he tells this delegation, sit down. And Abdullah ibn Rawaha is coming into the masjid at the time that the Prophet ﷺ says, sit down. And he doesn't understand the context of the fact that it was for that delegation. So he sat down right where he was at the door. He heard the Prophet ﷺ sit down, he sat down. This is the level of obedience that he had to the Prophet ﷺ, right? And obviously he went to Umrah al-Qada with the Prophet ﷺ, and he was reciting, by the way, in Umrah al-Qada, he had a mission to recite, or he didn't have a mission, but he decided to recite poetry against the Quraysh. And Umar radiallahu anhu got so upset. He's like, you're reciting poetry in Mecca, in your ihram. Like, how is this okay? And the Prophet ﷺ told him what? Let him recite the poetry. His poetry is harder on the Quraysh than arrows falling from the sky. Right? Let him continue with his poetry. Which, by the way, teaches us that media and propaganda and being able to have our own, news stories is so important for us as an ummah. So we often neglect this, right? But that's why we have no presence in the media. If you look at the media today, especially in America, we have, all over the world, subhanAllah, but especially in America, it's all one-sided, 100% one-sided, right? Today I was listening to a thing on Bloomberg on the radio, and this lady was giving her analysis of Syria, okay? And you can see, subhanAllah, no matter how much something is positive, they have to insert poison in the middle of the conversation. Like, so-and-so says this, so-and-so says that, so-and-so is concerned about this, so-and-so is concerned about, and then at the very, she closes it with what? Because often when you hear these news stories, like if someone is like an analyst, you remember what they say at the end, right? So her last statement was something to the effect of, yeah, everyone's really concerned about the fact that there's now going to be a resurgence of Al-Qaeda in Syria. Like really, this is what you took from the last 11 days of your phenomenal, revolution that's freed effectively 12 million people, that's bringing back justice to a country that hasn't had it for near 100 years. Like, is that really the only thing you can think of, right? And she closes off with that. So we have to get our own act together with respect to the media. Well, I always tell, I don't know if I told the story before this message, but a long time ago, when I lived in Australia, a brother came from South Africa to give a talk. He was a famous guy in South Africa, and he wasn't he was a white South African. What was very peculiar about this man at the time, this was at the time of apartheid. We're talking about the 80s, right? He came to give this talk, and his first question was, how many people here are doctors and how many people are engineers? And half the masjid raised their hand, half the masjid raised the other hand. And he said, this is the problem we have with the ummah. Like, we need politicians, we need people in the media, we need people that are lawyers, we need people that, we need a diverse, alhamdulillah, it's great if you're an engineer or a doctor. I'm an engineer myself, but we need more than that, right? So we should encourage our children in particular to do double majors or focus in areas where we've let it go to the others, right? We have to start to build our own there. So so they continue to march, and when they march they're now in Ghassani territory, i.e. proxy Roman territory. The Ghassasina, when they see the army, they actually panic. When they see the Muslims, they panic at first, and they run around and they start to call the other Christian tribes to come and join the fight against these Muslims that are invading the land, and they send for help from Heraclius himself. And so some of the other tribes are called Luqam, Juzan, Balqin. These are other Arab Christian tribes that came to join the fight with the Ghassasina. And they're now marching through the province of Man in Jordan. And the Arab tribes, as the Muslims are passing through, are shooting at them with arrows. In one such tribe, one of the Muslims died, and they stopped and they made a mashura. Should we go back? Like, it's a small town. Like, should we go back and take it? Should we go back? Because we can take them. Like, there's no problem. And the leader said, no, let's continue to march to the goal that the Prophet ﷺ sent us on. Let those people go. Now, there's an exaggeration in the books, of some of the books anyway, that speak about the other side having 100,000 men. That can't be true. There's no way that can be true. We know that the Muslims were 3,000. The other side couldn't have been 100. You didn't have 100,000 Christian Arabs in total, let alone create an army of 100,000 people, especially at a time when Heraclius was on the decline. He couldn't even recruit men. So by most historical accounts, they were about 20,000. And the enemy side was somewhere between 15 to 20,000. They weren't 100,000. They weren't really 100,000 men like some of the books. Definitely, either way, the Muslims are outnumbered by a factor of 5 to 1, 6 to 1. Right? Very, very true. And then when they get to the army, Zayd sees this situation in front of him. Like they're now looking and they're like, this is a lot more men than we thought we'd find, right? So he goes to Ibn Rawaha and he said, what's your advice? What do you think? Ibn Rawaha, he's one of the advisors of the leader of the army. And Ibn Rawaha says to him, this is what we came for. We came for Ihda al-Husnayn. We came for either victory or we came for shahada. Like, why are we going to turn back? Like, because he's like, because the Prophet ﷺ didn't tell us. He's like, that's okay. That's why we showed up. Right? And he says, I want you to tell the rest of the men. So Ibn Rawaha, obviously, he's the speech giver. He's the poet. I want you to encourage the men. So he starts to encourage the rest of the army. Don't be scared of what you desire. This is exactly what we came for. And they're now facing off against this massive army. Mu'tah was picked by most accounts because there's a river that passes through and the army is able to get water fairly easily. So remember, they don't have supplies, they don't have a supply route, they needed water, and so Mu'tah was convenient from a Muslim perspective for that, the ease of getting the water. And the army was divided into three sides: a center, a left wing, and a right wing. Very normal at the time. And Abu Hurairah is also in the battle. This is the first battle for Abu Hurairah, right? So remember, when did he take the Shahada? After Khaybar, right? Or during the time of Khaybar, he took his Shahada, so now he's joined the army. He's now a soldier in the army. And he sees the men, and his eyes go wide open. His eyes go like, eyes are like this. And the Sahaba then look at him, and they're shouting out. They're like, what are you afraid of? You weren't with us in Badr, man. You should have seen Badr. Like, Badr was much worse than this. So they're like, don't worry. They're calming Abu Hurairah. They're like, don't worry. We know it's your first time. Don't worry about how big the army is and the size of the army, which is an attitude of victory. And subhanAllah, again, if we just think of this, events in Syria, and wallahi, my brothers and sisters, like, we can't speak enough of how left to right things swung in 11 days. The amount of change in such a short period of time for a country that's been controlled and occupied for the last 100 years. I mean, the last major battles in Syria were, against a foreign enemy was 1935. Who was that against? Anyone know? Against the French. Who was it led by? Izz-ad-Din al-Qassam. Izz-ad-Din al-Qassam is when he became a hero there. Izz-ad-Din al-Qassam, after he fought against the French and the occupation of the French, he then went to Palestine. Right? The Kadaib today of Izz-ad-Din al-Qassam is actually a Syrian. He wasn't a Palestinian, right? And he was one of the mashayikh of the village, right? But like, you have these major milestones that happened in Syria, but the last 11 days, even the people that were in the army, that if you're looking on YouTube and you understand some Arabic, they'll tell you we didn't expect to get this far. Like, now the leader had this vision. I wanted to go to Damascus and liberate Damascus. But the rest of the people are like, really, Damascus? Like, that's a big deal. Do you remember the story of the companion? I keep forgetting his name. That stopped the Prophet ﷺ, and he told him, "Kayfa bika Suraqa ibn Malik." When you have the bracelets of Kisra, and he's like, Kisra? Kisra? You mean Kisra? That Kisra? He could, like, this is the kind of vision that's being set, right? So they're going in with a winning attitude. Zayd leads from the front, and he charges against the Romans. He charges the attack, and he is now surrounded. Like you can imagine how they're lined up. Once you charge with your horse, right, you're right in the middle of everyone else. Like, you're swinging your sword, but you're trapped by all the other enemy soldiers. Like, you're swinging as hard as you can, and they're stabbing at you with spears and swords. And so Zayd ibn Thabit radiallahu anhu, he dies as a shaheed, right? He dies as a shaheed. The Prophet ﷺ is in Medina, and he's giving the Sahaba the blow-by-blow events of the battle. He's transmitting to them real time exactly what's going on, right, in tremendous amount of detail. And he tells them that Zayd has become a shaheed. And the Prophet ﷺ visibly starts to get upset. He starts to get impacted, right, because of his love for these companions, obviously, radiallahu anhum ajma'in. And then Ja'far takes the flag, and he charges with his horse in the middle of the enemy, and he's smashing them to bits. Like, he is literally smashing them left and right, until one of the Roman soldiers cuts off the feet of the horse. So the horse falls, and Sayyidina Ja'far falls with the horse. He gets up and he starts the fight. He's still holding the flag. So he's holding the flag with one hand, he's swinging with his right hand, and then he gets attacked, and they cut his right hand, they cut his left hand, and now he's holding the flag with his stumps. and then someone comes from behind him and hits him so hard, he's practically cut in half. This Sayyidina Ja'far ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. So he dies as shaheed. And when they go and they actually get his body, Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar, by the way, they're all buried there. So if anyone ever goes to Jordan, you visited them, subhanAllah, yeah. So I've never been there. I've never been there, but they were buried. They were buried obviously where they died, because this is the sunnah for the shaheed, is they get buried where they die, right? Is Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he says, when we found his body, the body of Sayyidina Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, underneath a huge stack of dead Romans. Like, you can imagine how many Romans died for them, to find him. And then he says, when I got him, I counted 90 wounds in his body. Why would he count 90 wounds? Why would he bother counting, you think? Why would Abdullah ibn Umar bother count? Because it's a badge of honor. It means he did his job. Like, he's not doing it in some kind of, he's doing it to say, like, he fought a really honorable fight right before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the shahad, right? And Ibn Rawaha radiallahu anhu, he now takes the flag and he hesitates. And he versifies. He starts to say more poetry. Right? And the poetry he's now saying is for himself. He's now saying poetry. He's not saying poetry for the army. He's saying poetry for himself, right? And effectively, he's saying, I swear, oh my soul. So he's swearing against his soul that you're going to proceed, or I'm going to force you. You're going to either come with me, or I'm going to force you to come with me by force, right? To proceed. And he said, are you afraid because all these people have gathered? Why do you think you're so precious? And he goes in and he also dies as shaheed. So now the three leaders have died as a shuhada. Thabit ibn Arqam, who's the companion radiallahu anhu that has to get the flag. Why is the flag so important? It represents the army. It represents whether the army is dead or alive, right? Winning or losing. So Thabit ibn Arqam radiallahu anhu, he goes in and he takes the flag. When he takes the flag after Ibn Rawaha has died as shaheed, and he takes it and he runs away and he goes back to the army, back to the Muslims. Is that permitted? It's permitted to turn your back in battle? Yeah, that was, you guys did good, mashallah. Of course it's permitted, right? Like in this situation, yes, he didn't run away out of fear, he ran away to regroup, right? So the ayah in the Quran says it's completely permitted, right, to go back and to regroup or to change your strategies, right? So that's the time that it's allowed to turn around, right? So he goes back and he joins and he says, we now need a new leader. So imagine you're with Sayyidina Thabit ibn Arqam, he's carrying the flag, we're around him. What would you say? You be the leader. You have the flag and it looks really good on you. That's exactly what they say. They say you be the leader. And he's like, no, this job isn't for me. He's like, this job isn't for me. He's like, I got the flag, but I can't do this job, right? And so they look around and they turn to Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid. Now, the books of Sirah describe, subhanAllah, Sayyidina Khalid, when they ask him to come and be the leader, he feels weird. Why would he feel weird? He's new to Islam. He's been a Muslim like 1 or 2 months. Okay, so that's reason number one. That's another reason. He's a soldier. He doesn't see a path to victory. It's already a losing situation. Okay. What else? Uhud. I helped kill you. I fought against you in Uhud. I fought against you in Khandaq. You're asking me to come and be the leader? Like, you understand? He could have potentially helped kill some of their own family members, right, in these 2 battles. Plus, he's the newest to Islam. Like, technically, he's like, I can hardly pray, guys. I can hardly pray. But he takes it on anyway. Sayyid Khalid, he takes it on anyway, right? And subhanAllah, Sayyid Khalid, his genius now starts to come out. Right? The genius of Sayyid Khalid starts to come out. So what he does, in fact, here in the Battle of Mu'tah is taught even in military schools until today. And so the first thing he does is he regroups the army. He shifts some of the flanks left and right and center. And he does this amazing trick. Remember, the Romans are fighting off against them. The Romans, by the way, are not getting it easy. You understand? Like this is a little bit like, Israel and Gaza, right? Like, is Israel having a hard time and Gaza, are they having an easy time? No, they're not. They've been there now 15 months and they're still getting smashed every other day. Every other day. They've flattened the city completely. There's practically no buildings left, but they're still getting killed every day. They go in with military equipment, it still gets shot and blown up every day, right? So it's not like they're winning, you understand? They're not having a great time, okay? And they're still putting in flames and then, send the drones, let's check this, check that. Every day civilians being killed, every single day, right? So Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid, to add to that, he basically does this trick where the army is on a bit of a hill where you can't see what's behind it, and he starts to take the army on the right and say, you go behind the hill, so around and behind the hill, so the Romans can't see what you're doing. He takes some of the ones on the left and he goes, you go behind the hill, you pop up here, and then we're going to swap flags. You get new flags. So new men and new flags. Why was this important? Because the positioning of the Romans is constant. They have a similar situation where there's a center and left and right. So when they meet each other every day, they're pretty much seeing similar faces. Like, I remember you from yesterday. I remember they used to fight in the daytime and take a break at night, and they used to fight against it in the daytime, right? So when he did the swap, they're looking and they're like going like, these Arabs, man, they're getting constant reinforcements. One of these reinforcements is going to stop. The other trick that he did was he would have every soldier light up 5 campfires. And then he would say, walk around and pretend that there's a lot of you. There's only like one guy that lit up a camp, but if you have 5 campfires and there's like 10 men around each campfire, maybe I've got 50 men. So now they see all these campfires being lit up at night. And then they put it out during the day. So he's having a psychological effect on the enemy. The enemy is getting bruised and hit hard, and then they're seeing more men come in. More men come in. Where are these men coming from, right? So this is one of the techniques that he employs. He also goes in and he positioned the people with the arrows in a different direction. There's a very famous story about an older Sahabi. I can't remember his name now. But he had a bat. He was very strong with the bow and arrow, but he got so old his eyesight wasn't that good. So he tells 2 others to carry him, and he will shoot the arrow, and all he wanted from them was the direction. Like, tell me he's a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, and he's now shooting the arrows from the top of the hill. But Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid uses the archery a little bit differently to how the previous leaders had used it. And then he does massive full frontal assaults and comes back. Like, typically the Romans, when they would charge and continue to charge. He wouldn't do that. He would charge, smash up the let's say the 2-3 front lines, and then he'd retreat. This is like called what do they call that? Like the city warfare or yeah, like a hit and run, like exactly like a hit and run kind of militia type of technique. So the Romans are getting demoralized. They're losing thousands of men, and plus they see this going on the Muslim side of the house, and then Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid starts to do a organized retreat. Right, an organized retreat. So Mu'tah was not what you would call a total victory, meaning the army of the Romans wasn't wiped out and the Ghassasan weren't wiped out, but at least he was able to go back with the army intact. You understand? He took the whole army back safely. There's a hadith by Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anhu. He says, on one of the days of Mu'tah, I smashed in my hand 9 swords. I broke 9 swords. You understand what that means? Like, you're fighting with, I don't know if you've ever seen the swords that they used to use, like we probably can't carry it the way they used to carry it, for one, but they're massive and they're heavy and they're smashing the enemy with these swords, and he broke 9 of them. He broke it on men. And then at the end he said, I ended up fighting with a Yemeni shield. Like his hadith says, I smashed 9 swords on one of the days of Mu'tah, and I ended up fighting at the end with a Yemeni shield. That's all he had left, right? So you can just imagine the intensity of this battle that is taking place. The Prophet ﷺ, as he's speaking about the Shuhada, he mentions Ja'far ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, and he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has replaced, there's at least 4 or 5 hadith that mention this, replaced Ja'far's hands with wings like angels, and he's flying in Jannah wherever he wants to go. And then the Prophet ﷺ has to give the news to the family of Ja'far. Right? So he goes to give the family. By the way, who's his wife? Who's his wife? What's his wife's name? Asma, mashallah, Asma bint Umais. remember when Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab says to her, you're the seafaring lady. You're the one that rides the sea. You came from Abyssinia, right? And he says, but no, we have one hijrah with the Prophet ﷺ, and you can't beat us. And she went to complain to the Prophet ﷺ. Do you guys remember that story? That's his wife. That's his wife, right? And he has two young boys. And the Prophet ﷺ sits down from grief and he starts to talk. And so she sees that he's upset. She sees that he's upset, and she says, "Bi Abi anta wa ummi ya Rasulullah." She says, "Abalagaka an Ja'far wa ashabihi shay." Have you heard something about Ja'far and his companions? And he says, "Na'am usibu fi hadha al-yawm." So he tells her that they died as a shuhada. And so the hadith says, this is a hadith. Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, he says, فَقُمْتُ. So she got up and she started to scream. She started to scream and to yell, وَاجْتَمَعْتِ إِلَيَّ النِّسَاء. And the women gathered around me. There's another hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha that says, when the Prophet ﷺ sat down, because he was very grief-stricken when his companions passed away, he sent someone to the wife of Ja'far to tell her. and he says, the man came back. He was like a cousin to them or something. And this hadith is narrated by Aisha radiallahu anha. He told the Prophet ﷺ, they're yelling and they're screaming. And the Prophet ﷺ said to him, go over and tell them not to yell and not to scream, right? Now remember, this was part of the Jahili tradition. And when they would mourn, especially the women, they were trained to do this, by the way, from a young age. This wasn't just something that, they were trained to do this. The women in particular that say, oh, how can we live without you? Who's going to take care of it? Like, this was just the things that they said. And the Prophet sent him a second time. And then the third time, the man comes to him. And the Prophet ﷺ says something to the effect of, what do you want me to do? Take sand and throw it in their mouths. Aisha radiallahu anha was the narrator of this hadith. She gets really upset at the man. Does anyone know this story? She gets really upset at the man. She doesn't say who he is. So she starts off the hadith by saying, when we got the news of the death of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib and his companions in Mu'tah, and the Prophet ﷺ sent this man, the man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said that the women have a little bit of heavy mourning. Aisha was so diplomatic in her hadith. Remember, she doesn't tear anyone down. She doesn't call anyone names. She's like, the women had a higher level of mourning than was actually okay, And then the third time the man comes, she yells at the man from inside the hujurat. Because remember, there's a curtain, right? So she says to him, all you're doing is you're hurting the Prophet ﷺ. Like you've come back with that, like, can't you just be quiet about it? Don't say anything. What do you want him to do, right? And so this is another hadith that's mentioned. Oh, so this hadith also, the Prophet ﷺ says, وَخَرَجَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ إِلَى أَهْلِهِ فَقَالَ. So the Prophet ﷺ, when he saw the heavy mourning, he went back to his family and he said to them, fill in the blank. This is now a sunnah. When someone passes away, give them the food. Make the food for them. Make the food for them because the families now will be in mourning. And so this is a sunnah that we do until now, right? When someone passes away in a family, because the family is so busy with the affairs of the burial and they're sad and so forth, the rest of the community supports them any way we can. But one of the sunnah to do is to make them the food, so they don't have to worry about eating, for example. This is where this comes from. It comes from actually the events of Mu'tah and the death of the companions radiallahu anhum. So let's wrap up here and resume next. Actually, I'll be gone inshallah until I come back to the States on the 3rd or 4th of January. So we won't resume the Sunday right after, but the first Sunday after that, inshallah. So whatever, I think it's like the 12th. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Yeah, we'll resume the 12th of January because I won't be here. I'll be leaving inshallah. Okay. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم اغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء والأموات إنك سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وإسرافنا في أمرنا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم نسألك رضاك والجنة ونعوذ بك من سخطك والنار. اللهم إنك عفو كريم تحب العفو فاعف عنا. اللهم انصر الإسلام وأعز المسلمين واعلو برحمتك كما انتهى الحق والدين. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خير. عليكم. Sorry, was definitely a work. Very interesting. Yeah. Kids. How are you doing?